I've played a portion of Assassin's Creed Shadows, and I have some videos to share about it, starting with my Assassination gameplay preview and this AMA response video. I felt this session was short. There was more I wanted to see and find out, so I answer some questions with an honest I don't know. I may try to speculate based on what I have seen, but if I can't even do that, the question won't be included, so if yours didn't make it in here, it's because I also want to know and I'm just as curious as you are. Is this game for RPG Creed fans or old school fans? I think this game is for a different type of player, since it doesn't feel that much like either of those. It's a more demanding, taxing stealth game than I expect from the series, and isn't afraid to kill you for playing it wrong or ignoring systems, which is a stricter design philosophy that I've never seen in Assassin's Creed. I suspect a lot of existing fans will be taken off balance, especially when they realize how mean the game can be when you make mistakes. I think Assassin's Creed has this reputation of being a franchise that courts casual players, and there are understandable reasons why, but Shadows on Expert difficulty will likely not be what you're expecting. In a way, it takes some enjoyable elements from both formats though. You definitely have to think and behave much more like an assassin than the past few games, but the long-term decision making like skilling and gearing from them also matter. Guaranteed Assassination and Canon Mode are both optional toggles present for old school players who want the Animus to show them what really happened and believe their hidden blade should kill anyone they snuck up on. Canon Mode feels well done enough that unless you've already played the game recently or someone sitting next to you is telling you where they are, you might not even notice the choice moments happening at all. I missed most of them. It's like watching linear cutscenes from the classic games, it's pretty crazy. How does Canon Mode work? Canon Mode picks dialogue choices automatically, in a way where it's very hard, sometimes impossible to notice where the choice moments are. It's meant to be like you're experiencing the true events of the game, tuning the Animus so the simulation data it's presenting to you is only what really happened, like in the old games. You still get to select which character you play as whenever you want, and during moments where the story asks you who should fight and who should escape, you get to choose those because those actually affect gameplay. Are there ghosts or Oni? I didn't notice anything supernatural at all. Should I buy this game? Would you spend your own money on it if they weren't sending you a copy? I don't think anyone can tell you that yet. I would advise waiting until release and people have at least finished this long-form narrative-based open-world stealth RPG, at least most of it, before we have enough information to make a wise decision. About whether I personally would buy it based on what I played, yeah, I would, because I want to play a lot more of this stealth, and I'm curious about a specific thing I saw in present day. Is it fun? Do you think they're trying? Does this one have the sauce? They're pretty clearly trying here, and I think it does have some sauce, especially if you like stealth a lot. That's really the main thing it does amazingly well. I enjoy it in a very different way than Origins, Odyssey, or Valhalla, because I think it has to be enjoyed differently from those. I think I may end up liking it a little more than Mirage even, but the reason for that is a full conversation of its own. The short answer is that on expert difficulty, stealth is satisfyingly hard, and pushes me, tests me, and taxes me in a way I never expected and never received from Assassin's Creed. It's satisfying to get better at it, and it feels fair too. Also, this is the first time I've had real fun with the progression aspect of this format. I think Odyssey got it almost right, but there were a lot of annoying things about it that don't really seem to have been replicated here, but I can't actually be confident in saying that. I have to play a full playthrough. They've clearly put in some work to make your choices on gear and skills feel much better, though. Whatever you played it on, how did it run? How was the optimization? I played a PC build of the game over a remote connection to a terminal running Parsec or something similar. There wasn't much noticeable input lag since I think I was very close to the server. That said, since it was a remote streamed play session, it's hard to give any conclusions on how the performance was. I don't know the specs of the computer the game was running on, but it felt good most of the time, and in the footage I'll be uploading, you'll see it generally manages to stay at 60 FPS. When you played, how did the game feel? Does it still have the weighty feel of Valhalla, or does Naoe actually feel fast and responsive? Naoe feels very fast and nimble. She doesn't have that many different ways to move, but the movements she does have are pretty brisk. Most of her animations have been sped up immensely since the last time we looked at the game, and in terms of visuals and animation speed, she moves how I would imagine Xiaojun moving if she ever got a 3D game. The only real moments Naoe is slow is when she's dragging or carrying people, or pulling someone behind cover. That makes sense because she is a small, somewhat weak girl, and the game pulls you into the physicality of that pretty effectively. When she's running around and jumping on people, she's pretty zippy and lethal. Just don't ask her to pull or carry around something heavy. That weighty feel from Valhalla is more centered on Yasuke and is actually even heavier on him. Here, it's in a way that finally actually benefits you. His weight works to your advantage because when you're hit, he barely flinches, he takes very little damage, and you feel like your body itself is a weapon that you can slam into people or be imposing with. Other people and enemies feel small compared to you when you're Yasuke, and being in combatism makes you feel confident and threatening. So, is the game weighty? Depends on who you're playing. What do you think are the most solid mechanics in the game? Stealth is easily the strongest aspect here, and something they clearly put a lot of effort into on player, enemies, and level design. It just feels a lot smarter and a lot more intentional, and like it was a bit more handcrafted, to a noticeable extent than in previous games where it's there. There's not like a huge amount of like emphasis placed on it necessarily, but stealth is definitely a pretty important aspect of Shadows. I mean, even when you're playing as Yasuke, who is the combat character, you typically want to not aggro everybody, you want to kill small clusters of people, like a few at a time. Managing aggression and managing detection is extremely important in this game. Long-term decision making, like what skills you're going to unlock, what gear you're going to equip, also felt better to me in this game than any other in the series, so hopefully it stays that way. In your genuine opinion, can it beat Ghost of Tsushima? How does it differentiate itself from it? In terms of stealth gameplay, it already beats Ghost of Tsushima for me personally, and I'm very confident in saying that, even now. Shadows is much harder and more tense, it has more different stealth mechanics, and it's more satisfying to sneak in for me. In terms of other factors than that, it's way too early to say. I have to play the whole game first, but stealth is where this game feels very different from anything else, and delivers a kind of gameplay I can't really get in any other similar game. I will say I'd be surprised if something surpasses Ghost of Tsushima for me as a total experience, because it's like my favorite game of all time, tied with AC1, so I don't really think that's happening either way. It might. That'll be crazy. Can you rebind controls to behave like classic AC games? I didn't try this because the default controls are for the most part fairly well devised. However, I do suspect this would be difficult to do. Let's compare this to something like Mirage. Mirage has one attack button, and whether you do a light or a heavy is based on whether you press or hold it down. This mirrors the original games a little, they kind of work like that too. Shadows is back to having two different attack buttons for lights and heavies, both of which can be held to become charge attacks, so it would be tough to make room for all the inputs you would need. When the game releases, I'm sure myself and a few other close friends will try to create some control scheme variants just like we did for Mirage, but I wanted to use my playtime here to find out other things since it was pretty limited. Can you flick your hidden blade at will? I don't think so. If we can and I missed it, it's probably attached to the Tanto weapon type, since hidden blade and Tanto are always paired together in this game. I really doubt it though. I don't think there's a draw weapon action either, so even if hidden blade were an independent weapon type, which it isn't, we still wouldn't be able to do it. Do you think this game can be enjoyable to an Odyssey fan? I do. I think Odyssey fans who didn't like Valhalla and Mirage that much can once again have a good experience here, but note that in themes and story, this game is much more assassin heavy in feel, and it places stealth at a premium in a way Odyssey never really did. If you wish to engage more with the combat side of that equation, Yasuke will provide that experience for you, and you can invest your time into improving at his gameplay. I feel that gear and skills are both done much more intelligently here than in Odyssey as well, and the progression feels way smoother and less exhausting to engage with, so if you found gearing and skilling tiring you out in that game, they're a lot better here. You will be rewarded for learning how the various blocks that make up the build crafting structure click together, but unlike Odyssey, it also features many more ways to outskill or outsmart situations when you're in the moment, that don't just begin and end at number go up. Does the game use new technologies to more deeply immerse you in the world? It really does. This is an aspect that benefits very noticeably from being a game only playable on its generation of hardware. Particularly at nighttime, I feel like this is the most atmospheric and immersive an AC game has ever been, if you're a certain kind of player especially. The pace of the game being a little slower in the moments where it matters, like 10 stealth encounters for example, also works to its benefit. It almost has a light touch of the Red Dead Redemption 2 effect where, because slowing down is important to staying alive in the world, you pay attention to that world more, and notice all of its beauty. And because the world is quite pretty to look at, you feel more willing to slow down and feel a bit less impatient. The sound design is also ridiculously good. I'll mention some of that later in the presentation section. The scale of the world feels quite vast, and I think this time they've done much better at making that satisfying rather than annoying. Being on top of a viewpoint and seeing something 1400 meters away is just an insane feeling I've never had in Assassin's Creed. When you're on top of the tallest viewpoints you can find, you feel small, and looking down or into the horizon can sometimes crush you with this sensation of vertigo. The last time I felt this feeling was in Unity, due to the way it changed the scale of the world from the games before it to be more accurately tall. So if you have a fear of heights, some moments in Shadows might tickle that a little, which is an enjoyable feeling to me because, I'm crazy and I like to climb tall things in real life for the rush I get when I look down. AC1 feel, Unity feel, RPG feel, or a mix? It's like a Unity feel mixed with RPG feel, leaning slightly more toward Unity because of the world scale, game pacing, the tension of stealth, and how dangerous combat can be. Also, like, infiltrating interiors so much. So yeah, like 60% Unity, 40% RPG is how I experience it moment to moment. How easily can we make choreography for Shadows? We can make manual saves, and basically every element of the HUD can be stripped away or turned on and off selectively with quite a bit of granularity, so those are both very nice to have. As for the repeatability of a mission's clockwork upon reloading a save or checkpoint, I don't really know, I didn't try it that much. I think guard timings and patrols are pretty consistent, but with these games it's hard to say. Do you believe with the direction this game took that maybe we are coming back to the roots of AC? That's a very loaded phrase. So I'm not sure, because Assassin's Creed is no longer developed in such a way that one game defines the direction of the next game. Just because Shadows is this way doesn't mean Hexa can't do exactly the opposite and like go super old school. We just don't really know, because each game is now allowed to do something different and target a different audience. I do think Shadows is a game made with care though, and the design is way tighter than I was expecting from this series, especially from a game of this scale. Which is pretty nice, because modern AC has kind of felt like mush a lot of the time, and this does not feel that way. Everything is a bit tighter. Do you feel like an assassin in Shadows or like a one-man army? You get both here. Naoe feels like an assassin, and that sneaky rogue feeling is definitely strong on her. Yasuke feels like a one-man army. They both need each other in order to survive situations that would exploit their weaknesses. Does Naoe feel lighter than Basim? Naoe feels lighter than anyone. If movement was a little more advanced and complex, and she could do more actions, she would basically feel as agile as Altair and Ezio. But it's not, and she can't, so she doesn't. Close though. Do Naoe and Yasuke feel weighty to move around? Naoe doesn't, she feels agile and light. Yasuke feels weighty, though, like I said, it also acts to your benefit, because it means enemies have a hard time applying knockback to him and shoving him around. Like, in one of the videos I'll upload, Naoe gets kicked by a Miko, and she goes flying. If I was Yasuke there, he would not be displaced nearly as far, maybe not even at all. Does general movement feel responsive and good? I think it does, yeah. Just running around on flat ground, rolling, sliding, diving into prone, wiggling your left stick around in a circle, changing direction, all of it feels pretty responsive. Do we have manual jumps? We do not. We do have long dives and dodges though, and they can take you off edges and down to lower ground, or across small gaps between buildings if you land on the other side. So we can use our dive roll a bit like a manual jump because of that, and finding good spots to use it adds a bit of texture to the movement. Do ejects gain height? Can you eject mid-wall run? You can eject mid-wall run, they only gain height in very rare circumstances, so don't get excited, their range is extremely weak. They require a pre-detected object in range like the last few games. Basically, if you know what they feel like in the last few games, they feel exactly like that here. You can use them to climb some stuff that you otherwise couldn't as Naoe. That's pretty normal. I have an example of doing that in my viewpoints video you can take a look at, but the architecture is a lot less busy than Mirage, so Naoe has fewer chances to eject onto something, but it also means that she has less chances to target the wrong object when moving around, which does help the movement feel okay. But yeah, they still feel very weak here, heartbreakingly so. Honestly, their new range feels shorter than Mirage after Mirage got its parkour patch, so I really wish we could get this looked at a little bit and have them maybe doable from longer distances. If it needs to be made a toggle with a warning on it, like, hey, are you sure you want to enable this? I think that's fine. I just feel like a lot of players would appreciate that. Is parkour expressive? Not really. Not in the ways I would want to, anyway. If you're an AC1 to Unity fan, this parkour is not a trademark. It's really not what you're looking for. Naoe's parkour is mechanically as basic as something you would see in Origins, with a few extra actions that come from your dodge input and being able to grapple out of a wall run. Her movement does gain a bit more meaning from being able to do things that Yasuke can never do at all though, so that contrast helps give it a feeling of potency, even though the actual things she can do are pretty simple. How does the grappling hook work? Is it more like Uncharted 4 and Ghost of Tsushima, or Syndicate and Batman? The grappling hook feels closer to something like Ghost of Tsushima than anything else. It has physics, and you can both swing back and forth and climb up and down, depending on what you want. Like Syndicate and Arkham though, it can usually be used on any ledges as well, if they're in range, so climbing up is quite fast. You can also use it on certain anchor points in the world, like horizontal tree branches, if you want to swing across. How pervasive is the grappling hook when it comes to traversing the environment? Is it overbearing, or can you cross areas without it? The grappling hook is one of the only ways Shadows has to stress your movement skill, since it adds one extra, though still simple, layer of decision making and world processing. You can usually cross areas or climb without it, but you will move quicker if you notice good spots to use it in. It's not much, but it's something. One of the best feeling actions we can do in the game is extending a wall run with a grapple. I did this a few times and it felt great every time, and I want to do it more. Some handholds or ledges are way too tall to grapple from the ground or where you're standing, but they're also too tall to reach with a normal wall run. So what do? Well, they can be reached by finishing your wall run and then tapping the grapple button before Naoe falls out of the animation. This tech isn't hard to input, it's super easy to do, but it does require noticing where you can do it, which is something you get a bit better at as you play the game. Any non-standing objects, Parkour-Starters, or bars at all? Non-standing objects are fairly common. Parkour-Starters are also pretty frequent, though they look a bit different in this game. And bars, very limited from what I've seen. I feel like I only saw one of them in the entire time I played, but this may be region dependent, and I might have just not noticed. Given the way they work in Origins to Mirage, I don't suspect there's much of interest we can do on non-standing objects. In fact, without manual jump, they're really more of a hindrance, but they're definitely in the game. You can't really construct an Assassin's Creed world without them, just because of how architecture works. How does Shadows feel in compared to previous games in terms of the elegance and grace of the assassin? I had been very disappointed in that regard in the previous RPGs. I think if you enjoy the stylish animations of someone like Arno, Naoe in Shadows has a bit of that going on, while feeling less sluggish and clunky about it. General movement feels pretty decent. An issue I had with something like Unity is that, while it looks good and flashy, it could sometimes get in the way of input, control, and general playability. Shadows cuts down on the variety of animations, so Naoe does have less, but all of them felt and looked pretty fast and pretty good to do. One thing that really gets in the way to damage that feeling of assassin-like grace is that we do still have a bit of that stutter you guys will find familiar. You know, when you're at the edge of a building or object in the last few games and your character doesn't quite jump to the next one right away. It happens less in this game, and definitely happens less than in Mirage, but it's still here from time to time and it does hurt. I wonder if there could be a setting for that in the options menu at some point that lets us fall or jump off edges without that momentary safety net, since I know part of the reason it happens is it is kind of like a safety feature. If we confirm, hey, we accept the negative consequences of that happening, like let me fling myself off edges no matter what. I'm not sure how possible that is, but again, it's probably something some players would appreciate. Is hold forward to walk in this game. It would be really cool if controller players could get a toggle for this. If there was one, I didn't notice. Holding forward will jog in Shadows. As long as Assassin's Creed has 3 upright movement speeds and no profile system, I don't think we'll see a world where tilting the stick all the way or holding W will walk instead of jog, because that's the action most players will want to have easier access to over a long playthrough. It's worth pointing out, games letting you walk with a full forward tilt is an exception in the industry, not the norm. It's actually pretty rare that we see control schemes in other games where walking versus jogging and sprinting is done differently. It definitely sucks to have to painstakingly tilt the stick halfway when you just want to stroll around and roleplay moving through the world in a more reasonable manner, so I get it. Are stealth verbs tool-based or meter-based? They're both, since you can use some helpful abilities from stealth depending on the situation, which consumes adrenaline and cooldown, but you also have arrows, bullets, kunai, shuriken, bells, and smoke bombs, all of which pull from ammo counts that can be refilled and spent rapidly with no cooldown or meter cost. So, kind of for the first time ever, we have a game where it's actually using both paradigms, which I think is pretty interesting. I will talk about that in a future video. Are tools moddable like in Revelations or Mirage? Tools can have their functions altered or be given new ones by unlocking certain passives in our skill trees. I'll upload those skill trees later. I didn't see other kinds of tool modding. Is the cover system sticky? Not really. It feels a bit like Syndicate's cover, where you kind of press up against the corner of the wall or low object, and you lean on it automatically. Leaving cover also felt pretty easy. How much can you roll while prone? As much as you want. If you mean how far do you roll in terms of distance, it's not as long as I may have liked, but it's still pretty useful. How well does the detection system work compared to recent entries? I think it works way better. I think it's the most enjoyable and understandable detection has ever been, but it's also more threatening and more fair. Enemies can be exploited pretty well, but they're also way scarier if they are onto you and they're harder to get rid of. Do enemies look up during an alert? Buddy, enemies look up onto rooftops even without an alert. How fast is detection during day versus night? It is much faster. Are there shadows to hide in during the day and not just at night? Yes, and shadows become more important during the day because you need every bit of concealment you can get. If you can't find any, going prone is still good because it reduces how visible you are at range and lets you hide behind short objects or in grass. Are noise and light shared by the same meter? I think we just have a general visibility meter, and I'm not sure if it takes our noise generation into account, but I don't think so. How much control does the player have over which animations play for stealth kills? Not much. You can decide whether you're running or approaching slowly, and doing them from the back, front, or around cover might give you some different variants, but that's about it. Can you do non-lethal takedowns from above and without grabbing enemies? Unless I missed it, you can do neither of these. Non-lethal takedowns always require a grab from the ground and then a choke. Can all enemy types be fought in smoke? No. There are some enemies that will run around your smoke cloud in combat to reach you and rush you when they get close to you again. Certain special enemies will also sprint out of the cloud when you throw it onto them, but you can also use that to your advantage to get certain people out of an area, for example. How does Naoe stealth challenge you? Stealth as Naoe is the greatest joy this game can provide me, and the number one reason I want to play more of it. I haven't ever played something like this that marries the fun parts of an Assassin's Creed game with a bit more of a tactical, slower feel like you would get from a Splinter Cell or MGS5. Guards are pretty perceptive on Expert, and the only way to mitigate that quick detection rate is by equipping either appropriate gear or using darkness and shadows around the world, which is way stronger than any equipment you could ever find. Visibility in AC Shadows is not binary either, it's gradiated. You can think of it like a slightly easier version of Splinter Cell or the old Thief games, mixed with the free climbing and access to vertical space that a Brotherhood Assassin gets. While I said the game has gradiated visibility and concealment, if you get enough of it, you can actually achieve total invisibility, and that's when the eye indicator at the top of the screen is fully crossed out. Your stance also dictates how visible you are and how quickly a guard will notice you. Crouching mitigates detection somewhat, and being prone reduces your visibility even more. From what I played, I suspect those are two axes of visibility that interact together. Like how brightly lit you are is one, and your stance is the other, and they stack intuitively. That means if you're standing upright in broad daylight, you are visible from extremely far away, and if you're prone in a shadow, you are completely invisible with the eye indicator crossed out. This is like being in a haystack or a hiding door. Nothing can ever notice you in total invisibility no matter what, unless it walks up to you and bumps into you. Whenever you can't achieve that level of concealment though, you have to be very mindful of how much you're letting people see you, how far away they are, how much of your body is hidden behind things or how low to the ground you are, how much noise you're making. It all works together to create a very special kind of tension that is really alien to this series. Is the stealth more Chaos Theory or Blacklist? It's somewhere between the two, though it definitely leans more Blacklist. How does darkness and shadow affect the gameplay loop? They affect it very positively, I think. They're something you should constantly be thinking about and staying aware of to help yourself. One aspect about hiding in shadows that I really like is that it can make it more forgiving to recover from stealth mistakes. What I mean by that is, in no other AC game have I been detected more times by a guard that I just didn't realize existed. I'm so used to having perfect knowledge immediately of my surroundings in this series that it's made me complacent whenever I put a hood on and strap a knife to my arm. In Shadows, it never felt unfair, and it always felt like it was a genuine mistake I made that the game was just keeping me honest for. But in this way, shadows behave almost as one of your defensive layers. If you're hiding in a shadow, anyone who can see you will detect you way slower, giving you a lot more time to react by moving away, manipulating them, or quickly killing them. By being diligent about removing and extinguishing lights around yourself, in case you do miss a guard, when he starts detecting you, your information mistake, failing to observe an enemy was there, is punished less severely because you didn't make a positioning mistake. You're not chilling in bright light. You're in a shadow you created for yourself. This is the kind of thinking AC Shadows is having you do, and like I said earlier, it just feels very new for Assassin's Creed. It's very tasty for my thought process to chew on and think about as I'm crawling through these spaces. So like, although I'm moving fairly slowly so I don't make noise, that doesn't mean I'm not thinking about a billion different things, because I'm looking around at the environment, I'm looking at what shadows and lights are around me, I'm trying to position better in case something goes wrong, I'm noticing escape routes in case I have to run away. When was the last time you actually had to do that? This is the kind of stuff that Assassin's Creed just never asked of us in previous games. Can Yasuke climb things and do generic stealth like crouching? Yes, Yasuke can crouch and even go prone just like Naoe can. He cannot climb vertical surfaces, but he can jump and mantle, kind of like you see guards who can chase you in the classic AC games do. Like, no actual climbing is being done, but jumps and mantles are possible. So getting up to some basic form of high ground as Yasuke helps when you're doing bow or teppo stealth and headshotting people, but movement and sneaking are his defined weaknesses. You would want Naoe for those. Is range stealth a viable playstyle with Yasuke? If you're going to be doing any kind of stealth with Yasuke, you will probably want it to be ranged, yeah. Unless you're ghosting through areas and not touching anyone. Did they actually bring back Dual Assassinations, or was that bullshit? They actually brought back real, classic AC2 style Dual Assassinates, where you fall on both guys and stab them at the same time. I don't have footage of it, but I did it several times. It works exactly like you think. You get above two guards standing side by side, and the game will prompt you to do a double assassination on them. Naoe will fall on them both, stabbing both at once. If you've seen an Ezio double assassination, it basically looks exactly like that. Now they also have Chain Assassinate in the same game. In Shadows, Chain comes from a gear perk, where Naoe can throw a kunai at a nearby enemy after an assassination. How plausible and possible is ghosting in the game? It's tough to say how much full ghosting can be done, but I will already say that killing everyone in an area is probably not the wisest thing to do and not worth your time. First, there tend to be quite a lot of guards in these spaces. Many tend to be looking at each other or covering each other in case something happens. In much bigger areas especially, it's sometimes more efficient to throw your tools at objects and lights rather than at people. This game is much more about understanding that you have somewhere you need to be, so you mostly care about getting there, and the only ones you really want to remove are, enemies that get in the way of you getting to where you want to go. Are enemies intelligent? How's detection and stealth in general? Detection feels very fair and is intuitively faster or slower based on your lighting conditions and stance. Mistakes tend to be punished harshly in this game, so you definitely don't have all the time in the world to deal with guards like in the last few games, unless you're standing far away and you're in darkness. At the same time, no one will instant detect you through a wall anymore, which is appreciated. Enemies are generally what you'd expect them to be, unless you start disrupting the environments they're in or getting detected, and especially if they notice corpses without you taking them down soon after. Special units like higher ranking guards can sometimes do annoying things like walk with a buddy a little bit far apart so they can't be double assassinated. In combat, they might walk around your smoke cloud and rush you down if you miss them with the initial impact. One of the most illegal things I see enemies do in this game is actually look upwards, like look up toward rooftops, even if they're guards that patrol street level, and even if you haven't done anything wrong. You don't have to disturb them for them to do this. Guards just kind of look up in this game. Do enemies have schedules and believable routines? I didn't play enough to notice or look out for this, but I'm assuming they don't, otherwise it would be a marketing point. Is there any social stealth? I didn't notice any social stealth mechanics at all. That said, this game is delivering a type of stealth you haven't played in any previous game either, and the more time I spent with it, the more I enjoyed it, and the more I wanted to improve at it. Modern Tenchu? Actually, kind of, yeah. I still wish we'd actually get one of those for real, but with how tense stealth can get here, this is an okay substitute for now. Can you use solo Hidden Blade in combat? No. Hidden Blade actions and animations in combat are attached to the Tanto weapon type. In one of the videos I'll have, you can see me use a Tanto ability called Shadow Piercer on a shinobi disguised as a Miko. Naoe throws the Tanto at her enemy, dashes to them, extends her Hidden Blade, and stabs them in the neck, which applies vulnerable status to them. There's another ability in the Tanto tree called Hidden Hand that causes her to sheath the Tanto entirely and perform an assassination with the Hidden Blade mid-combat, dealing your full Hidden Blade damage to the enemy as if you stealth attack them, but both of those are abilities you cast. How does the Tanto in general feel? It's my preferred melee weapon with Naoe for now. It's extremely fast and a little tough to control as a result, but I look forward to learning to pilot it better. It can be very damaging and apply a lot of vulnerable, and it has a lot of strong evasion and movement mid-combat, since pressing dodge out of a charge attack lets you dash in or dash out while stinging the enemy with your blade, so you get to decide where you're standing, whether you're close or far, things like that. I've noticed that like a lot of knife or dagger type weapons in other games, it can be hard to play until you get used to it, but it will be worth it for me and players like me who really love the fantasy of just like a fast knife weapon. If you're someone who really focuses on your hidden blade too and stacks a lot of benefits on it, that's a very good reason to learn Tanto, because you get to benefit from mechanics and interactions that apply to your hidden blade during fights, when normally it's just a stealth tool. Does combat feel more like the RPG creeds or Ghost of Tsushima? It's somewhere in between, I feel. How tough and stressful it is also depends a lot on which character you're playing, but in either case, blocking, dodging, and parrying matter quite a bit, and accepting when you've lost a fight so you can exit the situation and start running before you die is one of the skills the game will test you on. If you're playing as Naoe, I almost want to say combat is closer to something like the threat level of Unity or Mirage, where like you kind of don't really want to be fighting as her that much unless you're just a god. To what degree can you animation cancel in combat? Is it closer to Dark Souls or Devil May Cry? You can cancel most actions into a dodge, guard, or ability cast, but the general feel of fighting is definitely closer to something more measured and tense, like Souls. You have to be more situationally aware. As Yasuke, you feel a lot more confident to just push people hard, but you're still abiding by the same kind of positional awareness and respecting enemy offense. No stamina though, that I could tell. You can move and attack as much as you want. How does switching characters work? Opening your character screen with all your equipped gear lets you switch characters by holding square or X. Then after a short memory corridor, you'll be the other character pretty much standing in the same location. It's not remarkable, but it works fine. After you switch characters, you should make sure you have whatever gear and skill points you want them to be using assigned before moving on to your objectives, unless you've been consistent about assigning points to them as you acquire them with the other character. Both Naoe and Yasuke progress at the exact same time, so each one basically gets their own copy of experience, knowledge, and skill points. Their gear is completely separate and not shared at all though. Yasuke can't use any of Naoe's weapons, she can't use any of his, they can't even see each other's inventory, but they can collect gear for each other. Is Yasuke Assassin-y at all? If not, how does his inclusion into AC affect the gameplay loop? With him being worse than Naoe in all aspects of assassinhood, does the inclusion of his gameplay fit into an AC game? I think if it was any other game, he might be a bit out of place, but he fits this specific game very well, and he really surprised me. I went in assuming I would play Naoe more than I did, and I wasn't expecting to enjoy deploying Yasuke as much as I did. This is a great question because it's something core fans should be very concerned about, but it's also a question making some assumptions that aren't actually true, like he is not actually worse than her at all aspects of assassinhood, just most of them. Okay, so one by one. Yasuke is not very assassin-y. You have Naoe for that. His inclusion affects the gameplay loop by providing you a very powerful solution to situations that Naoe's weaknesses would be pressed in. The way I understand it is, assassins are adaptable to both stealth and combat scenarios, but Naoe is someone whose training doesn't seem finished. As such, she's not incredible at fighting, and it's one of her physical character flaws that makes her interesting. Because combat is a part of assassin abilities, but it's something she struggles at, and enemies in this game are way scarier than anything in even Unity or Mirage, Yasuke can be called upon to resolve those dangerous combat scenarios. He allows you to deliberately make combat decisions that would be way too risky for Naoe to even try. His mastery of ranged weapons exceeds her significantly, his combat is much stronger since he staggers and flinches the shit out of people with his hits a lot more than she does, and he has like triple her health bar. So, because each character has such defined weaknesses, they can also be kind of overpowered in their own way, which feels really, really good. Can you still try to stealth kill a base with Yasuke as a harder challenge? I mean, you can try, especially if it's a smaller one, but it would be very hard, and you would truly feel that you're forcing him into something he's not really made to do. Yasuke's kills from stealth are extremely brutal, and always very loud. If you really wanted to do meaningful sneaking as him, what you would want to do is make sure people are isolated from each other, and invest into making sure your bow or teppo, which is your rifle, are doing as much damage as they can. Ranged headshots are the easiest way to pick people off without being discovered. His gun, much like guns in other ACs, is surprisingly a bit stealthier than expected. Killing one enemy and then rushing down another before they can react is also another possible path to wiping a location as him. But the kind of stealth you'll kind of be doing is short, localized fights where you quickly kill everyone before moving on to the next cluster of guards. But yeah, it's hard. Stealth is really Naoe's domain. Are you forced to switch characters? Can you play one character for the whole game without changing? During my gameplay, there wasn't a single situation where the game made me play one or the other. Except during the prologue, when it introduces both in a short mission that takes maybe 20 minutes. The game will usually not force you to be one or the other most of the time, but you will soon discover that it can be very persuasive about it if you're trying to run a character weak against certain situations into those situations. A good example is a video I'll have on this channel where I get totally rolled as Naoe in a fight and retry that situation with Yasuke, just obliterating the enemies there while freely making mistakes, getting hit, and not caring about it. With this in mind, if you're somehow just a gaming god, you can stick to one character most of the time and overcome their weaknesses through like build crafting or good gear, for example. Shadows is not designed to let you ignore one or the other though. One way this comes into play is specific activities that only one or the other can do. Yasuke can do horseback archery and kata, Naoe can do parkour gauntlets in the wilderness that use her grappling hook and ability to see paths quickly, and the reason you would want to do these is because no matter which character you do a side activity as, you get knowledge points for it, which expand both characters' skill trees. We also know from articles that Naoe and Yasuke's personal storylines can only be played by the appropriate character. When you're doing those areas and missions are designed specially for each one, and the other one's gameplay wouldn't really work in them. These are pretty rare though. For the other 90% of the game, you can try to stay as one character or the other, but players who are efficient at recognizing this is a Naoe situation or this is a Yasuke situation will clear difficult missions much earlier than players who don't do that, and will consequently progress through the storyline way quicker. Part of skill expression in this game is deciding which one is going to run a mission or tackle an area. It's like picking whether you use a gun or a smoke bomb in previous games. Players who use all their tools will excel at this game, and Naoe and Yasuke are considered part of that toolset. How different do Yasuke and Naoe really feel? They feel so different that they're kind of like playing two different games, except for recruits, which I think both can summon. Playing as each character, you learn to read and parse the world in totally separate ways, since the decisions you have access to as each one are very different. They share basically nothing between them. They each have 6 skill trees with no overlap, they share no weapon types, they're truly distinct experiences in every way you can imagine, and you'll appreciate having access to both when surviving on Expert. Yasuke does a lot more hit stun and combat damage. He flinches less from hits and knockbacks. If he gets hit while activating an ability, his skill will go through and interact with the enemy anyway. He has triple Naoe's health. He can lifesteal off of slain enemies, so playing him is kind of like playing a melee version of Doom. You basically want to be pushing forward aggressively as him all the time and constantly getting kills. Yasuke kind of loses in combat if he plays too passively, but if he's pressuring enemies, he can survive and be victorious in scenarios Naoe would be stupid to stay in. Naoe, meanwhile, is much more agile. She can access vertical space he can never even dream of. She has extra hiding spots she can use. Her assassinations are quiet. She has tools like shuriken, kunai, smoke bombs, and bells to make people turn around or go places or kill them from range. She has eagle vision. If you want to kill someone and leave the area as if you never even existed, Naoe is who you want to use. In combat, Naoe loses by playing too aggressively, so she's kind of the opposite of Yasuke. You want to pick people off very safely whenever it's not risky. Enemies will surround her more readily and feel free to pressure her because they're not afraid of her. She doesn't apply as much flinch or hit stun with her attacks as he does. Both characters have very defined strengths and weaknesses, and it makes you feel smart when you willingly choose to resolve a situation as one or the other because you recognize that one would benefit you more. Both gain progression at the same rate even if you stick to one for most of your playthrough, so you're never punished for focusing on one whenever you swap to the other. Just remember to assign your skill points and gear. Does switching between characters encourage interesting gameplay opportunities, or do you find it frustrating and prefer to stick to one style? I would say it does encourage interesting opportunities. It's pretty easy to tell that's the case even now, because they have such different mechanics and have access to such different strats. Personally, I never found myself frustrated at all when swapping, but this might vary from player to player. Like I said in a few other places, I feel smart and rewarded for identifying that a certain encounter or mission will be more efficient as one or the other. I consider both of these characters my weapons and means of imposing my will on the simulation, which I think is kind of the idea the present day intro gave me personally. Advance your goal by any means necessary. I'm technically not forced to do it. It is always my choice how I deal with the pressure the game exerts on me, but whenever I do swap, I get to assign points and try out the character building decisions I just made on that character. I get to see how they feel in a real situation. There's always something to look forward to, and the game is very willing to let you retune your characters whenever you want or try something new. With that said, I think it's obvious to everyone who follows me that I prefer playing Naoe most of the time. I mean, she is a ninja, she is an assassin. The ways she's strong are ways I'm used to thinking from playing these games with a stealth playstyle for so many years. Yasuke is great fun also because he highlights the parts of my brain that have been falling in love with Souls-likes and that kind of deliberate dodge, parry, be conscious of enemies around you combat for quite some time. Especially on bosses. I love fighting bosses with them. Is there a skill tree? Naoe and Yasuke each have 6 skill trees, which are completely different from each other. So there are 12 skill trees in the game, each of which is entirely unique. I've recorded footage of all skills in the game that are visible on those screens, which will be uploaded at some point soon. How do recruits work? Recruits are named, unique characters Naoe and Yasuke will meet through the story and draw to their side, which can later be summoned in different situations. The way these seem to be balanced is they are incredibly strong, but then when you do use them, they go on a long cooldown. A great example is one of my recruits can kill any enemy of 3 HP segments and down, no questions asked, no matter where they are. You can use this to punch a hole in a guard layout or get rid of someone who's about to see you, but then he's on cooldown for 6 minutes. Another recruit can be called in to start brawling, which can help in combat, as well as be a big distraction somewhere in an area. Each recruit has their own cooldown independent of the others, so if you use one, you can still use the other one. What did you think of the spy and informant systems of Shadows? I think they're pretty cleverly done, and I enjoyed playing with them. If it's something that'll tire me out later, I would need to play way more of the game to figure that out, but I think the way it's set up is really cool. You almost never need to use your scouts for anything, so much like switching characters, it is your choice. You're making that freely for yourself. If you want to explore and find an objective on your own, using the clues you have, you can go ahead and just do that on foot by yourself. It might take some time, you might have to be thorough, the first place you look in might not be where what you're looking for is, but you can do it. Scouts, meanwhile, are there to shortcut through that process if you don't want to search for an objective manually. You can choose to send more of them by spending more tokens at once, and the pulse will scan a wider zone of the map, all but guaranteeing you find what you're looking for. So scouts kind of interact with location data you acquire from viewpoints, because by cross-referencing location data from a viewpoint with, the general clue of something and then scanning where it makes sense for that to be, you're more likely to find what you're looking for. Once scouts do locate an objective for you, it sometimes still isn't an exact pinpoint area. It does shrink the search radius significantly though. A good comparison to this is the old Assassin's Creed games where an objective has a target icon on your minimap only until you actually get there, and then it turns into a big circle that you have to explore inside of to find what you're looking for. The reason you wouldn't want to use scouts every time is that the tokens for them are limited, and they only recharge when the in-game seasons change, like going, between summer, spring, winter, etc. Or you can refill them at safe houses, which are expensive to unlock, especially early game. Are loot and RPG elements as heavy as the RPG trilogy? They're much quicker and easier to engage with in this game from what I've played so far, but it is still too early to say. There's definitely less spending time in menus here, unless you really want to. For the most part, the gear pieces and loot in this game feel more comfortable to read and make decisions with, because their effects are more noticeable than Odyssey's, and it's easier to understand what something will do for you if you choose to wear it. This becomes especially true on higher rarity gear, because they start giving you new mechanics or skills outright, like unlocking chain assassination, slowing time when you're detected, dealing more damage with an air assassination, leaving your kunai unbroken when you throw them, and other stuff like that. You also feel less choked by gear in Shadows than you did in something like Odyssey, and while your survivability and damage still matter, we have more options for finishing situations that one of our characters is perhaps a little underpowered for. It doesn't feel so oppressive the way Odyssey often could. Even in situations where Naoe felt weak, I could overcome that by sending in Yasuke and slicing people up. Likewise, where he struggled to finish something, I could send in Naoe and just sneak past everything without even touching anyone. How does cosmetic customization work? Individual weapons and armor pieces you equip all have different appearances, and the ones I was able to try out all look pretty good, on both characters. I don't know if outfits are in the game or if gear piece transmog is present. Presumably that's something they're very aware players want, so I would expect it to be in the game at some point, if not on release, since the previous ones have all had it. I didn't see a button for it when I played, but it might be tied to our home base, so I can't be sure because I never actually got to try that. Can you equip a Kusarigama and a Katana at the same time? You can equip any two weapons at the same time and swap between them mid-gameplay with the D-pad. Since skills are attached to weapon types, and certain kinds of assassinations can only be done if you have a certain weapon type out, choosing your weapons before a mission is actually one of the satisfying parts of assassin prep work. For example, if I know I'm gonna be hunting people outdoors, I want a Tanto, because I can double assassinate paired guards since I have easy access to high ground and rooftops because I'm outdoors. But on the other hand, if I'm infiltrating a building, that doesn't help me because I can't really climb, right? So I may want other weapon types instead. So I can assassinate through a door, or I can rush assassinate people across a hallway, things like that. What did you think of the level design you played? I thought it was good, at least in missions, because that's what I pay attention to. Open world stuff, I don't really have that much of an opinion on just yet, because that's something I think requires a lot more playtime to get a feel for. It gave me some Unity feelings at times though, probably because of the increased emphasis on risky infiltrations against layouts that have a lot of guard density, and the increased focus on infiltrating buildings and indoor spaces, which hasn't really been the case for some time. The level design seems constructed in a way where you can't just throw your body at it and take it lightly and just win automatically. I had to play slow and constantly think about what I was doing in order to finish objectives. Indoor environments are particularly immersive and oppressive because they're very hostile to an assassin. Assassins do not feel comfortable indoors. There's nowhere to climb, moving quickly makes too much noise, there are a lot of light sources to deal with, you have to exist in tight spaces with a lot of enemies. A cool thing I also really like is animus memory walls are back, and the game is very happy to just tell you, nope, you are not going this way. This lets them make spaces that still give you a lot of freedom, but remove your access to parts of the world that would destroy the mission's navigation or stealth challenge if we could just go there. What kind of opportunities does weather provide? I didn't see that many weather changes, but the one I experienced personally is rain. Rain helps you a lot. You're usually pretty happy when it's raining. It makes you tougher to see at a distance, even during the day it feels like, and it lets you sprint and run around a little more freely without being heard. I didn't actually get to experience seasons changing, so... How is exploration? Is it very handholdy? What's up with the question marks? I have a short video discussing this as its own topic that will be uploaded soon, but exploration is definitely not like previous games. I don't think some of the articles really conveyed the way this feels. It still has some loose guidance, so it hasn't gone full Elden Ring or Breath of the Wild, which I know is a bit disappointing. I'm a bit disappointed in that too. But it's definitely the closest Assassin's Creed has ever been to that, and feeling like that. Especially with how on the nose the 5 colored player markers you can put down are. Those kind of made me laugh. You definitely have to do a bit more of your own thinking in this game, and use your own curiosity a little to look for things. Viewpoints take more effort to climb if they're actually useful ones that allow you to see very far. It takes a little bit more effort, it takes a little bit more thinking. How do secondary quests feel? Are they generic or well built? I found side activities, quests, and secondary investigations to be about what I would expect from a game like this. With this in mind, because of the way tracking your objectives and finding what you need actually works, it tends to feel better when you finally get it, because you are taking more time and spending more energy discovering things. Does the world feel lifeless or alive? I think it leans closer to feeling alive. During my demo, I was very focused on my tasks, so when I was roaming the open world to reach an objective, I couldn't pay too much attention to my surroundings, but during missions it definitely feels like the world is breathing, I guess. Especially when you slow down and take your time through an area. Wind and the breeze blowing gently through spaces, the flicker of candles and lanterns when you're infiltrating indoors. All of that stuff is pretty cool and feels like it gives the world this kind of dynamism that is enjoyable to be around. How is the game economy? I didn't get a good feel for this since I had more money than I could ever possibly spend for testing purposes, but it strikes me as being pretty strict in the early game. Choosing what to spend on is probably a decision with some weight. I have to see when the game releases though. How strong is the game's heart and story? How is the tone? Something that I think will surprise people, because it surprised me, is that the game is generally quite dark and serious, unless you're cherry-picking very specific moments of levity, which also feel appropriate and grounded in the setting. I think this is one of the crueler, more devastating openings an Assassin's Creed protagonist is forced to suffer through in the entire series. And if you're willing to buy in even a little bit emotionally, you will probably fucking hate these main targets a little bit. in a way you haven't hated a game's targets in a long time. I almost had emotional whiplash playing this after Mirage, because where I struggled to care about anyone Basim was stabbing, I actively wanted these people to die, and I wanted me to be the reason. The last time I ever felt that way in Assassin's Creed was long ago. Bringing back personal, emotional gravitas behind the people we're hunting is also really important for a long game like this. I will say that the Assassin's Creedness also kicks in much earlier than I was expecting. I don't want to mislead anyone by accident by saying that, because, I mean, we've seen this before. You know, an opening of an AC game shows us hoods, hidden blades, crests, hints at pieces of Eden and Templar machinations, and then that stuff kind of gets put on the back burner and we don't see it for a while. So, you know, it's happened before. This doesn't guarantee anything. But I will say I am really enjoying the upfront confidence so far. The game doesn't seem afraid to be Assassin's Creed narratively and, you know, put that at the forefront a little bit. It's something you would expect, of course, because this game is set in a time after Ezio's death, so Assassins and Templars obviously exist in the world at this time. The conflict is well established by this moment in history. It makes sense that the game is more overt about it. Tease me about it all you want, but I am a bit tired of Hidden Ones and Order of the Ancients by now. I think a lot of us are. It's been 10 years, so it does make me happy to be back in the realm of capital A assassins and Abstergo doing shady-ass shit again. It's a good feeling. Again, who knows if it goes anywhere or if they're just baiting me again, but yeah, we'll see. How is the voice acting? It's generally pretty good. I've tried it in English, which is fine, but the real highlight for me is immersive mode, which I played most of the time. Immersive mode is an audio setting that has characters speak the language appropriate to them. Portuguese characters will have Portuguese voice acting, Japanese characters will have Japanese voice acting, and so on. I find immersive mode to be really enjoyable. There are some pretty famous and well-known anime voice actors you may recognize if you play the game this way. The emotion really comes through when playing with this setting, I think. Though I do think the English voices are pretty good in the main story as well. Can we play as Basim in modern day? I'm honestly not sure if we can even leave the Animus, so it's too early to say. Your thoughts on modern day? So I can't show you anything, and there's probably not too much I'm allowed to say either. So I did see present day and Animus elements, which I enjoyed a lot as a hook. I wasn't expecting it to be done the way it was, even though we've had some articles about it. For me, those articles did not accurately describe what it would feel like to experience. That said, again, this doesn't have to mean anything. The openings of a lot of these games have a sick present day hook that doesn't go anywhere. From what I can see though, if you've read some of the comics or remember a bit of how spooky Unity and Syndicate felt at times, you may have a vague sense of the atmosphere of it. A positive for me is that creeping futuristic horror vibe that I've been missing for so long. That was an element of AC1 era Assassin's Creed that really appealed to me, and the Helix duology brought a little bit of it back, but not for long. So that uncomfortable feeling, that like horror vibe that present day is, to me, like defined by, is here again, and I really like that. I hope we get to engage with it to a satisfying extent, but pursuing present day stuff needed me to do things that were locked away in the demo. When the full game releases, I will be going hard on this part of it though, because I am very curious. Is the Brotherhood actually represented or not? It should be, yeah. I mean, Naoe is clearly an assassin. It takes place in a time period when Assassins and Templars obviously have a presence in the world, happening not too long after Ezio's death, like I said, so we should be well in the middle of the conflict by now. Naoe does get a proper hidden blade, like 2 minutes into playing as her, so, you know, there is at least one area with a clear assassin crest on it, but I haven't met any other assassin, and Naoe herself doesn't seem to know what she is. I think a big part of this game will be that, you know, her uncovering the truth of her heritage and coming to that realization, but we'll have to see. What's the background music like? Does it still have the hip-hop music when Yasuke gets in battle? None of it got stuck in my head by any means, but the music in this game is pretty well placed for the moods and environments you're in. When you're just moving around in the world, there's not a ton of ambient music, but this game has placed a lot more emphasis on ambient environmental sounds than ever before. You hear the wind around you, the rustling of fabrics and objects, the sounds of rivers and water, the sounds of rain. Even when there's no music, there's always something to listen to, in a way that's much more noticeable than previous games. One thing I kind of want to ask everyone to do if you end up playing this game is, like, get headphones on, stand inside a short building or a kakurega while it's raining on its roof, and just listen to that. It sounds crazy. I don't usually notice or care about this kind of thing, but I would actually like look up at my ceiling because I thought it was raining over where I was in real life. It's kind of nuts. I wish I had footage of that to show you, but proper missions or quests do have music, and that sounds pretty good. Yasuke does not usually have those beats. My interpretation of when they play and when music like that rolls for him is it happens to underscore important fights that mean something to his character personally. So in the fight against the main target I kill as him in the assassination gameplay uploaded, that musical energy kicks in because that fight matters to him. It feels pretty sick in the moment when you've actually got your hands on the buttons and you're fighting to take one of these guys down. I ended up really appreciating that, mix of hip-hop and Japanese vibes. It reminded me of Samurai Champloo, which is amazing, by the way. You should rewatch it. Would you say their non-linear narrative approach works? I am well known for being someone who critiques this narrative structure quite a lot. I typically prefer a linear story because it allows the writers better control of emotional setup and payoff in a way a less linear structure can make difficult to achieve. Shadows so far, though, seems to be the best version of this structure, and it's managed to keep me engaged in the time I played. A lot of this is helped by how dark and serious and just grim the story tends to be at times, which was not often the case in the last few games, but that darkness and that seriousness, it really helps me enjoy, being a detective and investigating things and finding information. Like I said, information is a huge theme of this game, and there's a very mysterious, conspiratorial vibe to the entire game. Finding information feels satisfying because that spooky feeling of discovering something you're not supposed to know, or knowledge that will hurt you for having learned it, is kind of always there. And whether that works as a whole, whether the story is strong and cohesive from beginning to end, that's unclear. No one can tell you that because the game's not out yet, but I think from what I've played, it definitely held my attention way better than Origins, Odyssey, Mirage, way better than all the parts of Valhalla that weren't First Civilization or Assassin related. But yeah, those are all the questions that I could pull together a satisfying answer for. Hopefully that answered some of your curiosities. Keep an eye on this channel. I will be uploading a variety of videos discussing various aspects of the game. Some of these will be factual, some of these will be speculation, but there's a lot to talk about. There's some stuff here that I really found cool.